Good afternoon and welcome to Fund Finance Friday. My name is Jeff Nagle and I am a partner in the finance group at Cadwalader. My day job consists of bank lending, primarily in the syndicated space and fund finance space, with a focus on NAV facilities. My other day job for the past few years has been in connection with LIBOR transition. Cadwalader has represented the ARRC in connection with creating contractual fallback language that many of you use in your finance facilities, the LSTA in connection with creating SOFR-based documentation and remediation documents, and many other industry groups and market participants. It's a Friday afternoon in August, so LIBOR may not be on your mind, but there are a couple of important market developments that we thought it would be helpful to bring to your attention. Today, we're going to briefly cover a couple of topics. First is a market update on what's happening in LIBOR transition. Second is a refresher on the LIBOR Act. Third is the star of our show, which is an update on the Federal Reserve's proposed rulemaking about the LIBOR Act that came out a couple of weeks ago. And to finish things up, we'll talk about a couple of key takeaways from our presentation. So now is a brief market update. A vast majority of loans that are being issued today are being issued in a non-LIBOR rate, primarily in SOFR. Parties also continue to remediate their existing LIBOR loans at a good pace, but there's still a lot of legacy LIBOR contracts out there. As a reminder, LIBOR is scheduled to cease on a representative basis on June 30th of next year. Although that seems like a long way in the future, there's really not a lot of time left in order to remediate legacy LIBOR loans. As a refresher, the LIBOR Act was passed and signed into law earlier this year. The LIBOR Act was designed primarily to assist the transition for tough legacy contracts. Those are contracts without workable fallback language and no effective means to transition or to implement fallback language. Most loans in the fund finance and corporate finance spaces have been assumed to be out of scope for the LIBOR Act, because even if they did not have perfect LIBOR fallbacks, they do have provisions generally that would allow them to use prime, Fed funds, a base rate, or some other non-LIBOR rate. The main purpose of the LIBOR Act was to allow these tough legacy contracts to transition to a Federal Reserve Board selected replacement rate. As part of the LIBOR Act, Congress delegated to the Federal Reserve the authority and the obligation to promulgate rules and regulations to implement the LIBOR Act. The big news over this summer is that the Federal Reserve in July came out with its proposed rules that would impact the LIBOR Act. The headline for the syndicated loan market is that the Federal Reserve is proposing to select term SOFR as the board selected benchmark replacement. This means that any commercial loans that are transitioning pursuant to the LIBOR Act will be using term SOFR plus the statutory spread, also known as the ARRC-ISDA spread that was set in the beginning of 2021. However, there are some potential nuances in the Fed's rules that could impact loans in the commercial market space. These are particularly pertinent as we may end up with a synthetic LIBOR after June 30th of next year. The UK's FCA is considering compelling LIBOR's administrator to publish on a non-representative basis after June 30th of next year, a LIBOR that will no longer be based off of panel banks' submissions. This is sometimes referred to as a synthetic or non-representative LIBOR. The purpose for potentially publishing the synthetic LIBOR is to assist cash products in non-US jurisdictions that do not get the benefit of the LIBOR Act and may also not have workable fallbacks, so-called tough legacy contracts. However, if such a synthetic LIBOR were published, it may have an impact on the US loan market as well. Through the Fed's proposed rules, certain commercial loans may become subject to the LIBOR Act, and perhaps in unexpected ways, particularly if synthetic LIBOR is published. This could potentially include causing some loans to fall back to a prime or a base rate on June 30th of next year, even if a synthetic LIBOR exists. It's unclear where this may end up. The Federal Reserve has asked for comments during a comment period. The comment period is over on August 29th, so the beginning of next week, and then the Fed will be publishing its ultimate rule in September. So what does this mean for the loan market in general and the fund finance market in particular? Well, we have a couple of key takeaways. The first key takeaway is to quote the marketing gurus, watch this space. Developments are regularly occurring in LIBOR transition, and you would be advised to keep up on those developments during the course of this year. The second key takeaway is that as we've been advising many clients for a long time, which is also consistent with the ARRC's advice, is that your best option is to take your future into your own hands. Do a consensual amendment to your loan. This occurs when all parties agree on a replacement, the documents are fixed, and you can choose exactly what you want to have happen to your loan. The second best option is to transition pursuant to robust fallback language, such as the ARRC hardwired fallback. In certain circumstances, you may get a result that is less than your ideal. However, this is a result that is contractually agreed between all parties. The worst option is to simply wait for the LIBOR Act to help you. This really should be seen as a fallback or break glass type of option for certain contracts that just cannot be otherwise remediated. If you wait for the LIBOR Act to act on your contract, you could be subject to various ambiguities, get outcomes that are unexpected or undesired, and sometimes have unhappy counterparties. It's best not to put your fate in the hands of others, take your fate into your own hands, and remediate your LIBOR contracts as soon as possible. Once again, my name is Jeff Nagle. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and I hope you have a good rest of your summer.